Audio up. Yep. Okay. All right. Hello. Here we go. This is our third class for today. This is July the 20th at 11 o'clock. My audio just sounds really funny. I'm trying to make sure I have it. Hopefully you can hear it okay. Microphone seems to be working. Okay. This is History 286, History of Religion at 11 o'clock on Monday. Man, something sounds weird. Let me redo the audio one more time just to make sure it sounds okay. Hello, check. Test, test, test. Hello, check. I'm going to turn it off. Should be up. It just sounds weird, but I guess that's okay. All right, so we got rudely interrupted. I didn't bother to go back and do like the last 10 minutes or whatever last week. But what happened was we had a crack apparently form in our bathtub and water was draining down through the floor and into the basement. So I'm sitting here. My studio is in our basement. And I looked over that way and water was just streaming down onto stuff. And I have a lot of important, valuable things down here. I'm going, so I had to go get a bucket and towels and everything. So it's going to cost us a lot of money. We're going to have to have the whole shower tub thing ripped out and redone and all. But you have to. If you want to take a shower, you can't have the water pouring down in the basement. So, well, I guess you could, but it would not be good for the house or anything or my stuff. So anyway, here we are. Just going to pick back up where we left off. I made a note last time where we left off. And there's a tiny little bug crawling on it. That's really weird. We were to the Messiah in Judaism. Okay. So before we get started, I believe your third exam goes up at noon today and will be available for a week through next Monday. And it covers Zoroastrianism, China, Japan, and the not ready for prime time, the religions that are not in the textbook section, right? So those will be on that test starting today. You also have your paper coming up. In fact, let me go ahead and just open the syllabus really quickly to make sure we don't miss anything. Let me do the share the screen thing. Boom. Okay. So, in fact, you don't need to see me at all for this. So, okay. So, yeah, we definitely got through where exam 3 ended, fortunately, last time. So we're okay. And I'm just looking at the date, trying to make sure this all 13th, right? Okay. Right. So today we'll pick back up with Judaism. I said we will continue part 10 with Judaism if necessary. And it's like I was psychic and knew it would be. So we'll do that. And then we'll start into Christianity. Exam 3, as I said, will go up today. It'll take you have 45 minutes. It won't take you that long to take it. Probably it's just like a 20, 25 question multiple choice. Don't forget that your big writing assignment is due by midnight a week from today. And your instructions are on here. And we've got 2 video quizzes we need to do coming up. So keep an eye out on the announcements for that too. They'll just be short little things where you watch part of a video and then answer some questions about it in multiple choice on Blackboard. Shouldn't be that big of a deal. That's not our class there. Okay. All right. So let's finish up Judaism first. Oh, that's not the one I want. That's not the sound effect I was expecting. All right, so let's, here we go. Now, we were not there, though. We were too close to the end of it. All right, so I think we were right about here. I talked about the Talmud was this was I'm throw my card away now. The Talmud was an additional book, like a supplemental book of Jewish legal material, sermons, history, and folklore, older than the Quran, but newer than the New Testament. The Messiah was supposed to be some kind of a warrior that God would send to kill Romans. And then he would become the literal king in Jerusalem, taking King Herod's place. I got the hiccups again. So you could see where the Jews of that time would be hostile toward the anybody claiming to be the Messiah. Well, you could see where King Herod would be hostile to this idea because he didn't want somebody coming along that would try to take his place. The split between Judaism and Christianity happens during the first century, mostly over the nature of Jesus, right? Jews thought he was like a fake Messiah at best, but Christians increasingly believed he was the Messiah promised by God. He was just different from what Jews had expected. But see, originally, Christians were Jews. Originally, being a Christian was just another way of being a Jew. For the first, 100 or so years, the only way to be a Christian was to be 100% a Jew, and then also believe that the Messiah had come and he was Jesus. So you had to do everything Jewish and then add on that one more thing to be Christian. But in the first century, the Apostle Paul, who never met Jesus in real life, Paul began to change the way that thinking went. Paul said, you don't have to be a Jew anymore to be a Christian. You can go from pagan to Christian and skip all the Jewish part. Judaism for Paul just became like the backstory, the history of Christianity, right? So think about how Christians think of the Old Testament, right? Christians think of the New Testament as like the guy, the story of Jesus's life and how to live your life and how to behave and everything. The Old Testament is seen by Christians largely, I think, as like a history book, right? It's like, here's everything that led up to Jesus. It's a history book of like the creation and the story of Moses and Abraham and the Ark and the Noah, and all that kind of up through the prophets. And then here comes the New Testament, which is the actually valid thing that you need as a Christian. Whereas, for the Jews, the Old Testament is the Bible. That is the Bible. So Paul came along and said the Old Testament is just going to be like a backstory. The New Testament is what matters. And he wrote over half of it in terms of the page count. So he began to convert people who were not Jews at all straight through to Christianity, skipping the Jewish part. This made the Jewish leaders, as you can imagine, very, very angry. So Paul did not get along with them very well. So you weren't required to keep the laws of Judaism. You could go straight to being a Christian. All right, more about that when we get into Christianity. Now let's finish up Judaism. There are different types of Judaism. The oldest, the most sort of standard form is Orthodox Judaism. Orthodox, particularly in religion, Orthodox means like regular or normal or standard. Okay, so Orthodox Judaism is the largest group. Now I have a picture of Hasidic Jews here. They are a particular branch of Orthodox Judaism that are like really extreme in their way. But that is one type of Orthodox Judaism. They're the largest group. They try to protect the traditional Jewish culture and religion. They keep the kosher food laws, which, by the way, means that food should be pure and clean. The animal, if it's a meat, should be killed without pain, and it should be blessed by a rabbi. So that's how you know a food is kosher, is if it's clean and pure, the animal was killed without pain, and it was blessed by a rabbi. They believe in strict observance of the Sabbath on Saturday, of course. And they use the Hebrew language in worship, sort of the way the Catholic Church uses Latin as a sort of a religious language. Now, for thousands of years, this was Judaism. But in the 1800s, as the modern world was approaching, or almost pretty much here, some Jews began to say, we need to make Judaism more modern so it's more appealing to young people. These were people, particularly in America and Europe, that were losing their interest in Judaism because it just seemed too old-fashioned and stuffy and just too hard to do. So they said, let's make a new version of Judaism that is easier and more modern and fits modern lifestyles. And so you get Reform Judaism, which began in 1843 to make it more modern and more like Protestant Christian services. So some of the things they did, the Talmud has no authority. In other words, you don't have to use rules written 1,500 years ago to live your life today. That makes sense. They don't look for the Messiah, right? In other words, they would say Orthodox Jews are sitting around going, is he here yet? Is he here yet? Is he here yet? Right? Whereas they're like, look, if he shows up and he has an ID card or something and can prove it, then we'll say, hey, the Messiah is here. Otherwise, we're not worried about it. He shows up when he shows up. Okay. And, there are different Christian sects that are the same way, right? There are some Christian sects that just do their thing in church. There are others that are like, has Jesus come back? Has Jesus come back? When is Jesus coming back, right? So it's just a different way of not stressing over it and taking it in stride. They'll worry about it when the time comes. I get that. And they say we have no homeland but the land of our birth. In other words, this goes back to the idea that Jews believe that Israel, Judea, whatever you want to call it, Palestine, the Holy Land, is their homeland given to them by God. And they sometimes obsess with, we want to go back to the homeland. That is our homeland. But what tended to happen to Jews throughout history is, they spread out all over the world, but they would speak maybe Hebrew or a version of like, for example, in Germany, they developed Yiddish, which was a combination of Hebrew and German, wherever they went. And they would keep the Jewish religion rather than often, in Christian places, Christianity. So, human beings are very xenophobic. Human beings don't like when the other, imagine how imagine the people that really don't like immigration from Mexico. These are people, you see them on YouTube videos all the time. These are people that when they see somebody that's more Hispanic, more Latin, and they're speaking Spanish, particularly in America, these people go bananas. Speak English. Why aren't you speaking English? Go back to your country. I'm American. No, this isn't your country, right? Well, sadly, that's a human trait that humans have always had. We're just, as humans, we tend to be suspicious of people that are different from us. You know this, right? And so Jewish people in places like Spain or Germany or Russia or France would be treated as aliens, right? They spoke somewhat of a different language. They had a different religion. They weren't good Christians like us, And so they talked about going back to their homeland. Well, why don't you go back then and get out of here? So the Reformed Jews say, we are Americans. We are British. We are wherever we live. We're not worried about Israel. And they speak less Hebrew in worship. Again, seems less alien. So I think, and also it's probably more welcoming to young people. So that's probably a good idea, and it's done pretty well. I told you we were only going to look at religious Jews with a couple of exceptions, and here's the exceptions. Secular or non-observant Jews. I show a few from television, of course. These are people who are ethnically Jewish, but they don't practice the religion. Okay. So they celebrate maybe Jewish holidays the way that a Christian might celebrate Halloween or Valentine's Day or Groundhog Day, but they don't make it a religious holiday like Easter or like Christmas. And they might even celebrate Christian holidays too as just culturally American or European holidays. They might give Christmas presents, not because of Jesus, but because it's Christmas, we give presents. You see what I mean? So they would see it as a secular, non-observant, non-religious type of thing. So Zionism is Jewish nationalism, the idea of promoting the Jewish nation. For the longest time, it was a movement to try to find a Jewish location that they could have as their nation. They wanted it to be in Palestine, which was what was in the Old Testament. And Theodor Herzl was a Jewish leader back in the late 1800s, right around 1900, who wrote a lot of books and gave speeches. He was encouraging Jewish people all over the world to move to Palestine and create a Jewish state there. So these maps show what Palestine looked like in 1946. Green is where Palestinian Muslim Arabs lived. White is where Jews lived. So from like 1900 to 1946, Jewish people had gone in there and purchased this land plot by plot by plot. They'd gone in and bought it. And by the way, that's the part of Israel worth having. The rest is largely desert and mountain. The UN plan in 1947 said the Jews can have the parts around where they've purchased, plus they can have the desert down here because it connects to the Red Sea. The Arabs would get the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, as long as this little part that borders Lebanon. Israel from 49 through 67 just went in militarily and took all the rest of it. And by 2005, Israel had claimed everything except the green parts here. So the Jews began buying land there around 1900 and leading to conflict with the Arabs. You get the Arab-Israeli wars of the 20th century and beyond. The Holocaust, of course, was the Nazi persecution and murder of the Jews of Europe, particularly in Germany, but not just there, also in Eastern Europe, in Poland, and places like that. 6 million Jews were killed between 1933 and 45, and of course had a profound and lasting impact on Judaism. In fact, because the world didn't seem to care that this had happened, although many did, but not as many as you would think would care, this led to the push for Israeli independence. Many Jews said, look, if the rest of the world isn't going to look out for us, we're going to have our own country and protect ourselves. And they certainly have done that. And of course, there's Hitler and the interns in the death camps. And then in 1948, the Jews living in Palestine declared this light green part to be the state of Israel. And so there was a new country, which is still around today. And then Jewish holy days include the Sabbath, which is Saturday, Passover, when the angel of death passed over the Jews and killed the Egyptians, Rosh Hashanah, which is, I believe, Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, the day you ask God to forgive your sins. This was the day that the high priest of the Second Temple used to go into the Holy of Holies and ask God to forgive the earth. And if God forgave the earth, the high priest would walk back out alive. If God had decided not to forgive the earth that year, then the high priest would be struck dead on the floor of the Holy of Holies. So they used to make the high priest wear a rope around his waist so that they could pull his dead body out if God didn't forgive the earth. Very practical, I thought. Then there's a million different ways to spell it. This is Hanukkah. As what's his name from Saturday Night Live says, it's not pronounced Chanukah. The C is silent in Hanukkah. There's a lot of different ways to pronounce it, but it's Hanukkah. And this is the 8-day Festival of Lights. Adam Sandler. You can actually go on YouTube and find all of his different songs about it on there. Instead of 1 day of gifts, we get 8 crazy nights. But it falls near Christmas, and I think I'm going to go out on a limb about this. Jewish people may disagree with me. I'm not sure, but my understanding is Hanukkah was not that big of a holiday for Jews. But what happened was, because it ends up falling on the calendar near Christmas, people were wanting to say Merry Christmas to all the Christians, but also reach out to others to enjoy the holiday season as well. And so they would say Happy Hanukkah to Jewish people. So Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, and Happy Kwanzaa if you like, and Happy New Year and whatever else. We cram a lot of holidays into that time. So it just became a bigger holiday than it had been, simply because it was in a prime location on the calendar to be included. In other words, if Yom Kippur was in December, you'd probably say Merry Christmas and Happy Yom Kippur. But I think Yom Kippur is bigger than Hanukkah. The bar mitzvah is when on a boy's 13th birthday, he becomes a man in the community and can participate in the church. I blank out on this all the time. I apologize. And of course, a bat mitzvah is when a young girl becomes Batman. No, it's when a young girl becomes a woman. All right, that's Judaism. And then let's see, we're going to get into Christianity a little bit here. What do you call it? The Muslim church is a mosque, the Christian is a church, and the Jewish is I always blank out on this word. I know it like I know my own name, and I always blank out on this word. I'm sorry. I don't know why I blank out on it. Drives me nuts. Synagogue. Why can't I remember synagogue? I don't know. All right, so let's just roll on into Christianity. Remember, your final exam will be Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Just those three, because that's plenty. They're big. Okay, so Christianity. I have a slideshow, by the way, in your PowerPoints of churches I don't think I've gone over that one with you, have I? I don't think so. If you want to look through it, you can. It's just pictures of a bunch of different famous churches around the world that shows how different the architecture is all over the earth with different types of churches. It begins with pictures of the churches in my hometown, small town in Alabama, and then it goes to places like the Notre Dame in Paris before it burned, and St. Basil's Cathedral in Moscow, and ones in Rio and in Sao Paulo, and just all over the world. It's really beautiful. All right, so Christianity. Just to show you on the map here, the purple areas are Catholic, predominantly Catholic. So began there in Italy, and you have Spain and Portugal and France and Ireland and Poland are all primarily Catholic. And then South America was colonized by the Spanish and the Portuguese, as was Mexico. So these areas are Catholic. And then Quebec was colonized by the French. So that's Catholic. And the Philippines by the Spanish. So it's mostly Catholic. Then Protestantism came along with Martin Luther, and it was German, largely German originally. And you have the Scandinavian areas that are Protestant, and Britain, which is Anglican, but arguably Protestant. And you have a big chunk of the United States, which is mostly Baptist and Methodist. The pink is mixed, so that means Catholic and Protestant are pretty evenly balanced in places like California and Michigan and all. Also Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa, because the British colonized them, so they're Protestant. And then there's also Orthodox. This is the Christianity branch that goes back to Constantinople. And so the Balkan Peninsula is Orthodox. Russia is Orthodox. That's the main places. You find a little bit of it in the United States. That's what mixed is. Okay. So here's our broken down. Protestants are about half of the Christians in the world. Catholics are about a quarter, and then everybody else is a quarter. So it's the largest religion in the world today with over 2 billion, it's probably more than that now. That's a few years old. There are certain basic themes that all Christians have to have or they're not Christian. If you believe or do these following things, poof, you're a Christian whether you knew it or not. If you don't do these things, you're not a Christian whether you think you are or not, okay? One is you believe in the uniqueness of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, what does that mean? It can mean a lot of things. Is he God himself? Maybe. Is he a man that God, divinely inhabited? Maybe. Is he half man and half God? Maybe. I've told you before, there's all on that scale of man and God. Jesus is all over that scale depending on who you ask. But one way or another, he can't just be a regular person. He has to be unique. The baptism ritual is something that came out of Judaism, and it's something that all Christians do, whether it be sprinkling a few drops of water on a baby's noggin, or whether it be taking you down to the river and plunging you bodily under it, or having like a hot tub in the sanctuary. I've been to all these different churches. They all do different things. There's the communion meal, where this is the communion where it can be every week. It can be every service. It can in Protestant churches, it's often quarterly, only 4 times a year, where you're given a little piece of bread somehow and a little bit of wine, and it's supposed to, or grape juice, and it's supposed to represent Jesus's body and Jesus's blood from the Last Supper. And then lastly, you believe in one lifetime and an afterlife of heaven or hell. So you're not really supposed to have reincarnation or immortality or anything like that. You're born, you live, you die, and you either go to heaven or hell. There you go. So those are the 4 unique things about Christianity that if you do these things, you're a Christian. If you don't do them, you're actually not. Okay, Christianity's origins go back to being a sect of Judaism, as we talked about in the last section. during the first century, during the Roman domination. This is the Roman Empire at that time. You can see they had Judea there. Jesus of Nazareth, that's the town up in the north where he came from. Was he born there or not? It depends on what you want to believe. There's almost no mention of Jesus in the non-Christian records. Obviously, we have the 4 Gospels that talk about him, and plus Acts of the Apostles and everything. But in the Roman records, the Roman histories, or the Jewish records, there's no mention of him. I say almost because Flavius Josephus, the Roman Jewish historian, may have mentioned him. I believe he mentioned John the Baptist and another fellow involved with him. That could have been Jesus. Maybe it wasn't. Doesn't mention him by name, but he's almost not mentioned entirely. But I always point out, why would he be, right? Why would the Romans writing a history of Judea have any interest in a guy that was not even on their radar the first 33 years of his life? Then he showed up in Jerusalem, and within a week he was dead. So, I'm not surprised the Romans didn't see fit to write a book about him, because they didn't care. Was he born in Bethlehem? Again, it depends on who you ask, who you talk to. Do you think that the census made you move to a different town? It's just strange. But in any case, he's either born in Nazareth or Bethlehem, but he was definitely crucified in Jerusalem by the Roman governor Pontius Pilate. Now, the Gospels were written by different people at different times with different audiences in mind. So if the gospel was written for the Jews to try to convert them to Christianity, then Pontius Pilate was that bad old Roman governor, and no wonder he killed Jesus. He killed all kind of Jews, and don't we hate him? And man, the Jews probably wanted Jesus to live, but the Romans killed him, dang it. But if the gospel was written to try to convince Romans to become Christian, the Romans don't want to be the bad guys in this story. So now it says, Pontius Pilate didn't want to kill Jesus, and he finally just threw his hands up in disgust and said, I wash my hands of this. You people are killing him, not me. And it was those bad old Jews that ordered him, crucify him, don't let him go, right? So was it the Jews that did it? Was it the Romans that did it? It depends on who you're trying to convince. And there's just different nativity scenes. There's always a star. There's always they're in a stable. They're not in a manger. This is the manger. The manger is the thing the animals eat out of. Mange is French for to eat, or Latin to eat. So he wasn't born in a trough. He was born in a stable and put in a manger to serve like a baby bed. And there's always like a donkey or other animal photobombing. So you can see the area we're talking about. This is the Roman realm of Judea, Galilee, Samaria, Palestine, the whole thing. And the Sea of Galilee is up here. That's important. The Dead Sea down here. Masada's down around here. So here's Jerusalem, the big city, and Bethlehem, its suburb, where he may have been born. Whereas here's the Sea of Galilee, and Nazareth is, you can see on the inset map, Nazareth is about right there, under the E in one of the E's in Galilee. So that's the area where Jesus lived. We think he probably worked along the coast here as a day laborer. I know that people translate, like for example, the King James Bible translates the Greek, because the entire New Testament was originally written in Greek. And the King James Bible translates it as carpenter, that Jesus and Joseph were carpenters, but that's not what the word means. In Greek, it's the word tekton. Tekton is not carpenter. Tekton is like day laborer. So Jesus was either like helping build buildings or doing more likely some kind of masonry work. There wasn't a lot of carpentry going on in Galilee anyway, because there really weren't any good trees or anything. It was a rough area, kind of like the way that Greece looks. Just a rough, rocky area. So a lot more rock construction than wood construction going on. So Jesus, in all likelihood, was not so much a carpenter as just a laborer building buildings for the Romans. The 4 Gospels, of course, the first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they were not written in that order. Mark is the earliest one, of course, but they were put in that order when the Bible was compiled 2,000 years ago almost. And they each were written probably between 70 and 120 AD after the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, burned the temple. Because up until then, the apostles, all the disciples all thought Jesus was coming back soon. They didn't understand. When he said, "I'll be back," they thought he meant in a couple of weeks. But, you know, it's been almost 2,000 years, less about 9 now. And he hadn't come back, so they had to slowly realize, you know, he's not coming back soon. Maybe we better write all this stuff down. So after Jerusalem was destroyed and people realized they needed to write stuff down to save it, they began writing the Gospels down. So the authors of the Gospels are not those 4 people. In fact, some of them are probably illiterate. The authors, they say the Gospel according to. So they are each written in the style of and with the information from each of those 4 people, of whom I believe 2 of them were disciples and 2 were not. There's disagreement over many details of Jesus' life and ministry. In them, of course, there would be. Only Matthew and Luke write of his birth. In fact, Matthew lays out the genealogy to show that Jesus is descended from King David, because one of the Old Testament Jewish prophecies was that the Messiah would be a descendant of King David. And this is when Matthew is trying to convince Jews to become Christians, because Jesus was descended from King David. And so he traces the begats back to King David. Luke, though, gives us the full nativity story. This is the one that is read. For example, I used to read this one when my kids were younger. I would read the nativity story from Luke. That's the one where it talks about, and so it came to pass that the Roman Emperor Augustus ordered that all the world should be taxed, and they would have a great a census to determine, you know, and all that. And they go, and there's no room in the inn. That whole story, it's a beautiful story. That's in Luke, only in Luke. Both versions of it say he was born of Mary, who was a virgin. Of course, Islam believes that as well, interestingly enough. We'll talk about that in the future. So he begins his ministry at age 30 after a childhood and a young adulthood of being a laborer. He discovered, I believe, John the Baptist's preachings and started to get interested in a more radical form of Judaism. Please bear in mind that Jesus from beginning to end was a Jew. As Riza Aslan likes to say, Jesus was a Jew teaching Judaism to other Jews. Christianity doesn't come around until after Jesus is off the stage in whatever form. So he begins his ministry at age 30. He traveled around after being baptized by John the Baptist. He fasted for 40 days in the Judean wilderness to try to determine what God wanted of him and what God wanted him to do and to be and to know. And while he was fasting, he is visited by Satan, as Dana Carvey would say. I always use this little story to point out the discrepancies and the differences between having some of this Gospels written for Jews as to convince people he's the Jewish Messiah, and written later for the Romans to convince them that he's the Son of God and he's a divine figure. So think about this, because I always used to wonder about this when I was a kid, and now it makes perfect sense. Let me see if I can help you. If Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, as Matthew and others would hold, okay, then he is going to grow up to be a great military commander who will defeat the Romans, defeat the bad Jews like Herod, and bring the kingdom of heaven, you know, to earth, and rule like King David over a good Jewish kingdom that he would be the king of. Well, if that's what he's going to do, then obviously Satan would be in league with the Romans. And Satan doesn't want the Jews to get a great military commander who will defeat his Romans. So what does Satan do? He tries to short circuit this process. He finds out that this young man is going to be the Jewish Messiah. And so he goes out to him in the desert and says, "Hey, Jesus, before you go off and risk your life in some risky scheme of fighting the Romans, if you'll follow me, Satan, if you'll follow me, he goes up to the top of a mountain, right? It says, or top of a hill or whatever. It says, all of this can be yours, like Wheel of Fortune. All of this showcase can be yours if you'll just follow me. And of course, Jesus is tempted, but he says, get thee behind me, Satan, and goes on to become a preacher and goes to Jerusalem for his rendezvous with destiny, right? But now, think about this. That makes perfect sense if Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, a man who will defeat the Romans and reign as the mortal king of Jerusalem, and Satan wants to get him out of the way and fails. Makes perfect sense. But if Jesus is the Son of God and literally God himself on earth with powers, right? Check my audio, make sure it's working right. So if Jesus is literally the Son of God, a divine being, in that case, if Satan comes up to you and says, hey, all of this here can be yours, Jesus's response, it seems like, would be, dude, it's already mine. I created it, or my Father created it. What would I need with you, little devil? What would I need with this little valley when the whole world is mine? Right? But he doesn't do that. And that is, again, because parts of the Gospels were written as Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, and parts are written as Jesus is the Son of God, and those aren't the same things. Christians over 2,000 years have come to make the word Messiah mean the Son of God, Jesus is God himself, but that's not precisely what it originally meant. And so that's why you get that discrepancy, why sometimes Jesus seems more powerful and sometimes he doesn't seem all that powerful, right? It's because it depends on who's doing the writing or the telling and who they're trying to convince. So he preaches in Galilee, up in the north around the Sea of Galilee where he was from. He chose a band of disciples, largely fishermen who were illiterate. He tells, one of them says, I'm a fisherman. I have to catch fish. And Jesus says, leave your nets behind. Come with me and be a fisher of men, meaning catch people for the religion. One disciple says, I have to bury my parents. They just died. And he says, let the dead bury the dead. You come with me. Which is like, leave your dying family, leave your dead family out to decompose. Come do this with me. This is more important. And you're kind of like, wow, man. He felt like this was a very important job that he was trying to get the disciples to go do. It's usually given as 12, but others say more. It just depends. His ministry lasted about 3 years in Galilee, where he mostly healed. He really did two things. Jesus' ministry was made up of two activities, two practices. One was he would preach, right? He would tell parables. He would tell stories. He would tell things like I'll get to them in a minute. But the lost sheep, the prodigal son, all that. Other times he would heal. He would do healing. And he was extremely popular at this because, I always say, imagine if you're living in Judea during this time and you're dirt poor. I mean, these people were so poor, the Romans couldn't even tax them because they didn't have any money to hand over. They were dirt poor. They couldn't help it. This is where they were, and they were poor. And what money they did have, they would give to the second temple, to the priest, for forgiveness from God. So they were dirt poor. Well, let's say a family member let's say your child gets sick. There's no doctors. There's no emergency room. There's no hospital. There's no urgent care. There's nothing. What do? You have no money to go get like a Roman doctor, and they wouldn't have been able to do anything anyway, right? The only thing you could do is go to a holy man and ask him to do some kind of magical religious healing. Well, Jesus was the only one of these Jewish holy men that was doing healing. Let me back up. I've always said there are two possible reasons why he was so popular at this. He was very popular at healing. One is that it actually worked, right? And if you believe that Jesus is the Son of God and he was the Messiah and he had this power to work miracles, then you believe that Jesus healed these people, which is a wonderful thing, right? That means that these people that couldn't get help any other way and were condemned to misery and pain and death, they had Jesus come in and lay hands on them and pray or whatever and heal them. what a wonderful story, right? Because otherwise they had nothing. They had no hope. So if you were a devout Christian, you believe that one of the great appeals Jesus had that made him so popular was it actually worked. Whereas probably these other holy men, they didn't have any way of actually healing anybody. They would probably, they would say, alakazam, zappity boo, and you'd be the same as you were before. Okay, so the idea that it might have actually worked is one reason Jesus would have been a popular healer. The other, though, is one we can understand, I think, even better. All the others charged money, and Jesus did it for free. So these people, like I said, are just dirt poor. And if their child is sick and they bring in a healer, that healer may say, well, I got to charge you. And you say, well, I don't have anything. Well, what do you have? I've got this one coin. I'll take it. Alakazam, hooty hoo, you're healed. And of course, they weren't healed. So these healers were taking money from people that were dirt poor. And of course, it wasn't doing anything to heal them. Whereas Jesus wasn't taking money. And again, if you're a devout Christian, you believe, hey, it worked. So he was super popular. He was a rock star in this game. So for 3 years he did this, and people, and he was telling the parables. Got the hiccups again. Excuse me, I'm having them all day. Parables are short stories that explain a truth. When you watch Reza Aslan's video later, he makes the point that people back then expected stories not necessarily to be true, but just to make a point. So that he argues that in some ways the Gospels themselves are more parables. A lot of it should not be taken literally. It just explains some greater truth. Do with that what you will. But the prodigal son, the lost sheep, the good Samaritan, these are all stories that had various themes, including pacifism sometimes, right? He'd say, he said, turn the other cheek, love thy neighbor. But he also said, I did not come to bring peace to the world. I came bearing a sword. That's a quote from Jesus. So, he had his moments where he was not a pacifist. He wasn't Gandhi always. The people's superiority over the Jewish law sometimes. So he often stressed the Jewish law, but he also felt like taking care of human beings often mattered more than the letter of the law, which I think we can all kind of get on board with. So sometimes, the law says this, but human decency says that, Think about Martin Luther King feeling like the people had superiority over bad laws of segregation and injustice. And then the coming end of an age, right? He would say that the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of my Father is coming. Many thought he meant like that he would be the king and actually rule on the throne there in Jerusalem. Certainly Herod had believed that. But on the other hand, others thought he meant like a divine kingdom in heaven, that earth, that the world would end and we would all go up to heaven in the rapture and all that. So, he talked about these things and people didn't always understand what he meant. He also talked about human values, the perils of riches and compassion. So things like it is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. He performed all kinds of miracles. He healed, as I said, he healed the sick, the blind, the lame. He fed the hungry, like with the loaves and the fishes. He raised the dead. That's a pretty good one. Lazarus, I guess. He cast out demons that were supposedly possessing people. And of course, the most famous one is like the least consequential. All these others did really important things for people. Jesus walking on water is like, okay, you did that. That didn't really help anybody. I think he was walking to like another boat, and that was important. He had to be there to help somebody, but he walked on water. So these are all things that he had a lot of miracles. And then he goes to Jerusalem. This is going to get us to the Last Supper. He entered Jerusalem to preach there during Passover. He was welcomed. This is Palm Sunday. They lay down palms in his path. He taught and debated in the temple. He objected, and when I say objected, he objected to the temple practices. They had the money changers. They had the animals out there in cages. They were selling at outrageous prices to people to be forgiven. Jesus flipped over the money changers. He took changers' tables. He took a whip and beat the people there. He let the animals go that were valuable. He really ticked off a lot of important people when he went to the Second Temple and started trashing the place. But he felt like he was justified because they were not practicing how he felt religion should be, that Judaism should be practiced. Remember, he's a Jew. There's no Christianity. He had that final communion meal with the disciples on Thursday evening. It included the symbolic transformation of bread and wine. I say, or real. Some sects of Christianity say that the bread and the wine literally became his flesh and his blood. Others say it's symbolic. He was betrayed by Judas, his own disciple, who kissed him on the cheek to show the Romans which one was Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. When the Romans were looking for Jesus, going into the Garden of Gethsemane was a good move because we think of it like as the size of my basement here or something, but the Garden of Gethsemane was kind of like Sherwood Forest in Robin Hood. It was this great big woodland where you could, as an outlaw, and Jesus was as much an outlaw as Robin Hood, right? You could go into that garden, that forest, and hide out from the Romans pretty much indefinitely. You could hide away in the woods. So the Romans, that's why the Romans had a hard time finding him and had to get Judas to show them the way for 30 pieces of silver. So there's the famous painting by Leonardo, not DiCaprio, Leonardo da Vinci of the Last Supper. I always say apparently they had to all sit at the bar because there was no chairs. There were no chairs on this side of the table. There's all kind of stories about this painting. It's actually on a wall. It's had to be preserved. It's on a wall. It's not like it's not like a fabric, like a canvas painting. Excuse me again. I'm sorry. I'm yawning and hiccuping and everything. It's terrible. Now this is again a very representative picture of Jesus because he could not have afforded these kind of clothing. He was very modest of means. In the Garden of Gethsemane, praying to God. And again, the Gospels disagree on this because some say he kind of accepted his fate heroically and bravely. Others say he begged God to let the cup pass to somebody else. Why do I have to die? You know. And again, this makes sense because they were written by different people at different times, second, third, fourth hand, and with different purposes in mind. He was, after being arrested, he was put on trial by the Jewish court and by the Romans, Governor Pilate. Others would say that Pilate wouldn't have even wasted his time. That's why I have a question mark there, that Pilate was the governor, but they were executing like 100 Jews a day or something. So why would he have gone out of his busy schedule to listen to the trial of this one guy who, what was his crime? He flipped over some tables in the temple and the Jewish leaders are mad at him. I don't care. I'm the Roman governor. What do I care? Do whatever you want with him. In fact, Pilate was so vicious that not long after the crucifixion of Christ, the Roman emperor called Pilate home to be like put up on charges of mismanagement of Judea for being so brutal. So the Romans didn't like him. Some Jewish groups didn't like him. It just depends on whose story you're telling as to who it was that really went out to get him. But in any case, he was beaten savagely and then crucified at 9 o'clock in the morning on Friday. The Bible speaks, the Gospels speak of cataclysmic events while he was dying. I believe like the curtain in the temple was torn apart. There was an eclipse. There was earthquake. All kind of stuff happened. Basically to express God's displeasure that humans were killing his son. By 3 p.m. he was dead. And he was buried in a nearby tomb, which all that means is he was laid out in a little cave with the intention that his flesh would molder away. And after a few months, they would go back in. They check on him every few days. But they'd go back in, collect the bones, and put them in a box called an ossuary with his name on the side. So, I always thought, well, why would this rich person give Jesus his whole tomb? That seems pretty generous. Well, no, he didn't. A tomb back then like that was really more of a processing center. So if you didn't think you were going to die within the next 6 months or so, and who wants to think that, then this guy's like, yeah, why don't you let Jesus use it now? And then by the time I need it, he'll be long gone. His bones will be collected and taken out. So people were coming and going from his tomb, which is why they came to find that his body was gone, of course. So in the Christian faith, this is the resurrection story, that on Sunday morning, which would today be Easter Sunday, the tomb was found empty. The four Gospels, of course, give different accounts, as they would. Some say he appeared to the disciples there and conversed with them. But one way or another, and he showed the holes, right? Some say he was there for a while, for like 40 days or something. One type of Christianity says that he actually before he, well, some types say he descended into hell and visited with the people in hell for a while. On the third day, he rose again from the dead and was on earth and then ascended to heaven. Others, though, would say that he came to the New World way before Columbus and actually stopped a war between Native American tribes who are Jewish, the lost tribes of Israel. But in any case, he ascended into heaven, and there he sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. The Gospels agree the tomb was found empty and he had conquered death. And they say he died to save all humans from sin. So there's not really disagreement about that. Okay, last couple of things for today. So early Christianity arises out of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. It originally, as I said, it was just one way of being a Jew. It was a sect of Judaism. If you wanted to be a Christian in the first century, pretty much, the only way to do it was to be 100% a Jew and then tack on that Jesus part at the end. But over the years, his followers gathered converts. Originally, remember, they were converting Jews, but over time, they began to go out into what's called the Gentile community, the non-Jews. This early Christianity sect was led by James, Jesus' brother. Now, some sects of Christianity don't accept that James was Jesus' brother. Others do accept it. The idea being that Joseph and Mary wouldn't have stopped with one kid. They'd have had a bunch because families back then tended to have a bunch. So Joseph and Mary had other children, including James. In fact, James calls Jesus' brother on numerous occasions in the Bible. If you're of a sect that doesn't believe that they're related, then you say this is symbolic, right? Like, you are my brother, you know. Others say, no, he's literally Jesus' brother. Why wouldn't he? I would point out, if he's the Jewish Messiah, it makes even more sense he'd have brothers and sisters. If he's the Son of God, then at best, James is his half-brother, right? Because James would be the son of Joseph, whereas Jesus would be the Son of God. But they're both the child of Mary. So James led the church in Jerusalem, along with Stephen. He was killed prior to the Roman destruction of the Second Temple in 70 A.D. Yeah, Peter would go on to lead the church in Rome and is today considered sort of the honorary first pope. That's why he has the keys, because he has the keys to the kingdom of heaven. And so he's often depicted as standing in front of the pearly gates. Peter's successors, the bishops of Rome, eventually become the popes. So what is the Pope? The Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth, the representative of Jesus on earth, but he's also considered the successor of St. Peter. And in fact, the basilica there, the Vatican, is called St. Peter's Basilica. There's what St. Peter used to look like. If you watch that show, the Borgias, I guess, on Showtime or whatever, you see this building because it wasn't replaced until the 1700s. Here are the three that have been on that site. Nero's racetrack with the obelisk in the infield and the execution of Peter. And then you have in black the outline of the first Vatican. And then in the dotted line is the outline of the second one. And there's what it looked like inside the original Vatican before it was torn down. And there's the current one. They've moved the obelisk from the middle of Nero's racetrack to the center of this courtyard. And Paul. All right, so let me get in a little bit of Paul and we'll wrap up with him. That'll leave us still a little bit left to go, but not a huge amount. So I might start with Paul and we'll see how far I get. So Paul was originally named Saul of Tarsus, and he was a Jewish Roman citizen whose job was to persecute Christians. He thought Christians were the worst thing ever for some reason. And so Saul went around the Middle East looking for people who were Christian that he could accuse of crimes and have them executed. he was responsible for the death of quite a few Christians, which is interesting when you consider he becomes the greatest missionary in all of Christian history. But at the time, he was a bad guy. Then one day, he was on the road to Damascus, walking on his way up to Syria, and a bright light shines down on him and says, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me so?" And he's blinded, literally blinded. And he says, "Lord, who are you?" And the voice says, "I am Jesus of Nazareth. Why do you persecute me so?" And so he prays, and I guess he begins to think maybe I wasn't so crazy. Maybe the people that I've been executing weren't so crazy about believing in Jesus. And then Jesus tells him, "Go to Damascus, and there all will be revealed to you." And so he gets help in wandering, blind to Damascus. And we were told that there the scales fell from his eyes. He could see again. And he could see, like, he could really see, right? He could see Jesus. And he understood. In fact, he went and confronted James and Stephen in Jerusalem at the temple. And he said, "You need to start preaching to the Gentiles." And they said, "No, we're Jewish. We're not preaching to Gentiles. Who told you that? Who told you we should do that?" And Paul said, "Jesus did." And James and Stephen are like, "Well, when did you ever meet Jesus?" Because James is his brother, and Stephen, we're really, we knew him. We hung out with him back in the day. When did you ever meet Jesus? And Paul says, "I never met him, but I know him better than you two do." Well, can you imagine being Jesus's brother and Jesus is dead, and somebody comes up and says, "I never met your brother in life, but I know him better than you do"? Because Paul figured that meeting Jesus there in that light was more profound than just knowing him in human form. So Paul was very confident and very full of himself, let's say. So he becomes a missionary, and he goes on to write 14 of the books of the New Testament, but in page count, again, it's over half, because some of them are really short. Some of the other books, some of those are too. But he writes 14 of the books as letters. You can argue that Paul did not write them as chapters in a new book about Jesus. What happened was Paul was writing letters Paul was going around as a missionary creating churches. So like he would go to Thessalonica, and he would teach them about Jesus and how to build a church. And then later he would get a letter from them saying, "Dear Paul, we are confused about certain things about having a church and being Christian. Could you answer this?" And he was right. Okay, fine. He wrote a letter back. Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. "Dear Thessalonians, you are so stupid. Can you not follow simple instructions?" He's very mean to them. But the letters, the 14 books that he wrote are all his letters to the different churches he had started himself in other places in the 50s and 60s AD when he was preaching to the Gentiles. And so he is considered the second founder of Christianity, and really the person that creates Christianity as its own religion, right? Jesus, to the time he ascended to heaven or died or whatever you want to say, right? Until the end of Jesus' existence on earth, he was a Jew preaching to Jews. Paul is the one that says we need to expand this out to people who aren't already Jewish and let them become Christians too. And what a difference that made, because it would become the biggest religion in history. Okay, so I'm going to put a note that we stopped at the first page of Paul, and we're out of time. But don't forget your test will be available in just a few minutes. You have a week to take it. And we'll have video quizzes coming up soon. So I will see you guys. Again, email me or whatever if you need to make an appointment with me, or you want to email me, talk about it. Anything you need to handle. Otherwise, we are out of here for another week, and I'll see you guys later.